Anthem Sports and Entertainment. I'm going to pull up the press release here. Buying a controlling interest in AXS TV and HD Net Movies. This story, it was first reported on by Joe Lanza at Voices of Wrestling all the way back at the beginning of the summer. And then it seemed like, I had heard from several people where it seemed like over the summer, this was pretty imminent that it was going to be happening. And then it seemed that things cooled down a bit. Last week in The Observer, Dave Meltzer noting that the talks were still very active between the two sides. And today we got the announcement. And I'm just going to read some from the press release because there's a lot to digest here. Anthem Sports and Entertainment, a global multi-platform media company, today announced it has acquired a majority interest in HDNet LLC, parent of the widely distributed U.S. television networks AXS TV and HDNet Movies, and will assume operating management of the two popular channels that cater to music, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle audiences. Just overall thoughts, Wade. This is an enormous purchase, and very rare, too, that you have a Canadian-based company buying out an American network. I mean, that's pretty rare in and of itself.
Yeah, certainly. I think when I initially heard the rumor, I, like many people, probably didn't think that it would be possible or didn't think it made any sense. But again, I think knowing, Leonard Asper, having worked for Leonard Asper, you and I feel like, a lot of people are looking at this asking, are they really buying a channel just to air Impact? I don't think it's about that. I think Len, his goal has always been to build his own media conglomerate, just like his father. And much of that, in order to exist these days, you really have to have a huge foothold in the U.S. And that's why I think Impact was a property that interested him. And to me, this is the next step for him in building that media conglomerate. With Impact, I guess, just, having a bit of a bonus now, putting, that whole search for a TV channel finally to rest, seemingly. But, yeah.
Yeah, with this news coming out this afternoon, I really hope that they hold some kind of conference call or press conference maybe to discuss further. And I think it's going to be everyone's question is what is the larger long-term strategy here? Because if we're just coming at it from the perspective of Impact, it's really hard to make sense of this. Like, that seems like the obvious of all moves that Impact moves to AXS, of course. You're going from the Pursuit channel, which is around 30 million homes, into AXS. It's not like it's this it's a positive step for Impact. You're now going from 30 million homes to over 50 million homes. But, I mean, still a far cry from what you're talking about with a USA Network or a TNT that are in 89, 90 million homes, respectively. You're also, like what we talk about constantly, is that the game right now for professional wrestling, for combat sports in general, is creating content that you can ultimately land enormous rights fees for. And they're kind of taking Impact away from that because now you are both the distributor and the supplier of that wrestling content. So what the ultimate play here is, like this, obviously, you have to undertake financing. I'm sure if a price ever comes out for this, I'm sure it's enormous. What your ultimate plan is to make that back off the cable industry in the U.S. right now. I mean, this is on AXS TV where, to the best of my recollection, they still do not subscribe to Nielsen numbers. So we're not going to hear ratings for this either. And what kind of advertising you can acquire through that. I mean, there's just many, many questions of what is the ultimate play, because on the surface here, you think like this is an enormous, it's an enormous step forward. I think the most ambitious step Anthem has ever taken.
Yeah. Bigger than purchasing Impact.
I absolutely. Our audience listening here, obviously they're focused on the wrestling aspect of this. What do you feel this means for Impact and where do you put it?
I've seen some suggestions online. I think Tuesday is a perfect time slot that doesn't seem to be, talked about by any of the either AEW or WWE at the moment. Everybody seems to be fighting over Wednesdays. Meanwhile, Tuesday is a perfectly, conditioned a time slot for wrestling audiences to spend 2 hours a week watching wrestling with, and it's unaddressed right now. I think it's a good spot in the middle of the week to try to get Impact, that relevance again. Friday, certainly I don't see them continuing, or at least that to me it would make no sense. Um, you're asking people like potentially if they were to air on Friday, let's say at 10 o'clock, like 10 to 12, come on, for brand new programming, nobody's really keeping up with that.
But that's where they put them on their own channel on Pursuit. They put them on Friday at 10. That was their own channel.
And I look at the result, like who's talking about Impact, you know? I think maybe at some point you're really banking on VOD viewers or people that are PVRing, but you get that on Tuesday as well, and you'll get more discussion coming out of Tuesday as well throughout the week. So to me, that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I think that they're going to have more attention than most Access programming, but I look at Access just as a vehicle to promote your product, and you don't hear much about women of wrestling. I mean, LFA is an MMA group that runs constantly, like that's their block. It's a small company. I guess the biggest one is New Japan, that you can say like there has been certainly a following of New Japan, and you can kind of argue like has the exposure on Access significantly increased awareness of New Japan, dovetailed off the success of New Japan World? I mean, certainly you can argue that Access has definitely helped for especially audiences seeking out English commentary. They also have New Japan Up to Date now. And those are all interesting questions right now. What becomes of the ongoing combat sports programming that's on AXS TV? Like, you would think that everything stays still, but what effect will that have? Everyone is aware of New Japan's kind of aversion to working with Impact.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I imagine whatever contracts exist will continue. But I also feel like if you're New Japan, this isn't exactly the same story. You know, even now, like, I think working with Impact is very different from working with the same Impact that, you know, created Okado. But we're talking about a television broadcaster now. So to me, it's a completely different story. I mean, I'm sure New Japan, whenever the deal is up, will be looking to see what other partners might be interested. But I wonder what that market is like for New Japan Pro Wrestling in the US.
Well, it seems, from comments that Harry Smith has made, that is still a very fresh wound for New Japan, even all these years removed and several regimes later. But now is an interesting time for New Japan. I mean, they are having some success going on their own to the U.S. What is the extent of the relationship with Ring of Honor at the moment? And strategically, does it make sense to kind of kick the tires with Impact now that they are controlling your broadcast outlet in the U.S.? And it would seem like there is also a strategic gain for New Japan to get along with Impact Wrestling if they don't have other options. And maybe there is a chance to revisit things at this point because there is a need to do so.
Certainly. Yeah. Where do you see them continuing to package, or do you see them packaging Impact with New Japan Pro Wrestling in a block?
I would do that. I would want to have New Japan as a lead-in for Impact and do like your wrestling block. And I don't know if you keep that on. Well, right now New Japan is airing on Saturdays, and they had just made that big move, and they have done significant improvements to their New Japan broadcast so that they have stuff that's pretty up to date very quickly. So I don't know if they'd want to throw that up. I don't think Saturday night is a great night to be doing that when you have so much other combat sports competition, specifically from mixed martial arts, but boxing as well. And Saturday is quickly becoming AEW's night when they run pay-per-views. But I mean, there's going to be a pro and con to pretty much any night of the week that you run. You ultimately have to have a product that people are willing to go out of their way and see. And that is going to be the test for Impact Wrestling. Garrett Kidney just wrote this great piece for Voices of Wrestling, and it's what you and I have talked about, that being good is not good enough anymore. Impact 3 years ago was in a totally different space where if they lucked into a better TV deal, better talent, like they could have strived to be that alternative. Well, now you're in a marketplace where AEW has TNT behind it, and when it comes to advertisers, to sponsors, to talent, AEW is now going to be, I think, most people's alternative to WWE, where you might want to take your business, and Impact is just trying to squeeze in there and create an awareness for themselves. And they are investing to the utmost degree to try and create that space for themselves.
Certainly, but I think no matter how good the product is, the most important thing is that you have an avenue for people to at least see it. And so to me, I'm sure like if you're Anthem, you're telling Scott Demore and Don Callis, hey, do your best with this thing, make sure it's good. We'll take care of the rest. And the rest is finding a home with which to air these, several hours of new pro wrestling programming every single week. And let's not, maybe ignore the fact that with Anthem owning majority stake in this channel, they can air Impact as much as they want. So they could air it on Tuesday, they could air it on Friday. It could, ultimately just increase visibility for the product. I mean, at that point, still, how many people might watch it? That's another question. But they at least have full control of how often and where they want to air the show.
Yeah, I don't imagine it's not going to affect Canadians too much beyond whatever night of the week they switch it to, because AXS does have some penetration into Canada, but it is very minimal. I would imagine it's just going to be the same where you watch it on Fight Network and Game TV, which are the outlets now.
Right.
They also mentioned that they are going to continue to run these channels with AXS TV operating out of LA, with HDNet Movies out of Denver, and then, of course, they have their Toronto offices. And, I mean, that's another element to all of this way. Whenever you see these buyouts or companies coming together, there is a certain level of redundancy, and you can you have to look at that point too. Are there going to be cuts? Are there going to be will there be people affected by this kind of thing? Like, that's typically how the current media landscape works, is that one buys out another, or there's a company that is brought in, and that's just the unfortunate outcome a lot of times.
Certainly. Yeah. It's one of the, terrible things about many businesses right now, but especially the television industry. And, you and I know that firsthand. So, if that were to happen to anybody, it'll be too bad, but it's part of the game.
Yep. Any kind of other thoughts? Like, it's a major story, and I'm sure many people have a lot of questions, and it's going to be, I mean, how quickly do you think that they make this move to AXS TV? Do they?
I think Bound for Glory is a perfect time, maybe even the week before Bound for Glory or a couple weeks. I imagine a lot of people will probably, if they build it well enough, maybe at least give it Bound for Glory a chance. And I think that would be a perfect time to really, get set for like a big relaunch.
Part of me thinks you give it a few weeks to really promote the launch on AXS TV, but I mean, what is your vehicle for promotion at the moment? It's minuscule right now. So I don't, it's like getting to AXS. If you have this pay-per-view October 20th, you would think the more time we have on AXS, the better, that more people in theory are watching our show to sell our pay-per-view. So you would want to, I think, maybe expedite that process as quick as possible. And you're also doing it at a time when wrestling fans are going to be changing their viewing habits very quickly with a lot of moves and additions of programming. And now Impact is trying to kind of wave their hand in the air and, hey, we've got this night and this move to look forward to, because I would not keep it Fridays at 10 o'clock unless you are pitched on the idea that there's all these wrestling fans watching SmackDown now on Friday nights, that you go at 10 o'clock and try to grab some of thsome people right afterwards, which they did try in the past when SmackDown was on Fridays.
Well, listen, I mean, depending on when they want to air this Impact on AXS, if they want to go with the Tuesday, there is an opening on October 1st that'll no longer be taken up by SmackDown. So maybe that's your launch.
Yeah. So this is, I will say this for Impact, like, we have seen like the decline of television outlets. This is at least a positive move for them in terms of just their visibility, because it's just been from Spike to Destination America to Pop to the Pursuit channel, where I don't think they've had less visibility at this point, at least in the US. They do have several international deals in the UK, in India, in South Africa. But in terms of the domestic US, I would have to venture that they have as little an audience now as they've had in the US, maybe since their launch when they were just strictly on pay-per-view.
Yeah. Though, like, now that it's, and I think this was always the case, like when, with Impact's role with Fight Network, but, it also fulfills the role of simply creating content for your television station so that, Anthem doesn't have to go out and buy more other content from other promotions.
Right.
So in that sense, they save money, and I think it makes sense as an investment, continued investment. But again, I can't really speak to what business practices they had it really in mind.
Yeah, and hard to know when you don't know what the purchase price was. Like, what are we talking about here that they have to ultimately make work over? You would think like this is a long-term goal to make this a profitable venture for them, and that is obviously remains to be seen. But a big story coming out of not just the wrestling industry, but the television industry on Monday afternoon.